To break down the Browns and what to expect from them in 2020, we are now joined by Nate Ulrich, who covers the team for the Akron Beacon Journal. Nate, you got Lance Meadow and Paul Dottino here on Giants.com, Big Blue Kickoff Live. Greatly appreciate the time today. Hope you and yours are safe and healthy. How's everything on your end?
Pretty good. Hanging in there. Thanks, guys, for having me. Eager to talk some football with you. Hope we get to it.
Absolutely. Well, our pleasure to have you on the program. And, Nate, I want to start with the quarterback situation. And the reason it being a situation is because I think most people are hoping that Baker Mayfield bounces back from what was somewhat of a sophomore slump. The one thing, Nate, that jumps out to me that I think a lot of people overlook, he has had so many head coaches and coordinators and voices in his head over the span of his first two seasons, and now you're adding Kevin Stefanski and Alex Van Pelt into the mix. I guess I think of Alex Smith, if you recall, with the Niners, and how he had so many coordinators in his first 7 seasons of the league. How concerning, Nate, is that there's been so much turnover on the offensive side of the ball when it comes to the coaching philosophy?
It's definitely concerning. I mean, the lack of continuity has been something that's been plaguing the Browns for a long, long time. And, Kevin Stefanski comes in here, and they really just need to give this guy a chance to be a stabilizing force. Jimmy and Dee Haslam, since they bought the team in 2012, their MO has been turnover. I mean, they fired 2 coaches just after 1 season, Freddie Kitchens being the most recent. And, Kevin Stefanski's the 6th full-time head coach since they bought the team. So it's been that way in the coaching ranks and the front office. And you look around the division, I mean, the Steelers with Mike Tomlin, the Ravens with John Harbaugh. The Bengals obviously have had Marvin Lewis forever, but now have Zach Taylor for the last couple of years. But there has been continuity from the Browns' main competitors, and the Browns just haven't had. They have been the complete opposite. And, Baker Mayfield's just one of many players who's had to deal with that. And of course, it's huge because of the quarterback position and learning these new systems. But, Kevin Stefanski is bringing a scheme to the Browns that historically has been very quarterback-friendly, and it has a lot to do with running the ball. It's that Mike Shanahan, Kyle Shanahan, Gary Kubiak scheme that's powered by wide zone blocking that sets up play action passing. So they think that Baker Mayfield's really going to benefit from it, and the Browns certainly have to hope that he does and that they can get some continuity for a change.
Well, let's stick with Mayfield because new offensive coordinator Alex Van Pelt has certainly had experience with some pretty good quarterbacks. Had Andy Dalton with Cincinnati just before this job, and then, of course, a few years ago, had Aaron Rodgers. So as he takes the controls for Baker Mayfield, what does he need to do to get this guy to have a breakout third season in the NFL? Because at this point, it was up, it was down. Where does that arrow turn in year 3?
Well, I think that a huge part of it is, Mayfield just had some kind of crazy regression last year because his fundamentals got sloppy, and a big part of it was his footwork. His footwork was just out of whack all season. He talked about it repeatedly. I mean, it wasn't a secret. He admitted it. And Freddie Kitchens, being a first-year head coach, and Ryan Lindley being a very inexperienced quarterbacks coach. It was his first season as an NFL quarterbacks coach, even though he played quarterback in the NFL. They just couldn't get it straightened out with Baker last year. They just could not get him back on track with the footwork, and he was uncharacteristically inaccurate as a result of his feet being messed up. We saw the pinpoint accuracy in 2018, his rookie season, when he came in and only actually played 13 and a half games because he did not begin the season as a starter. He was behind Tyrod Taylor. Anyway, he comes in 13 and a half games, and then he sets the NFL rookie single-season touchdown pass record with 27. And that had everybody thinking this is why they picked him number 1 overall. He comes back. Footwork is a mess for some reason. It just never gets figured out. And he has, 22 touchdowns and 21 interceptions. And it was a huge problem. Now, Alex Van Pelt comes in, and the first thing he does with Baker Mayfield, one of the first things he does with Baker Mayfield, says, we're going to change your footwork. It was a problem last year. I've worked with a bunch of quarterbacks, including Aaron Rodgers, and I am convinced that I know the footwork that works best in this scheme. It's kind of the West Coast quarterback footwork is what Alex Van Pelt basically describes it as. And a big change is it's just from the very beginning, they're changing Baker Mayfield's stance. He's going to have his left foot forward in shotgun instead of his right. He has never done this before. And they're taking out a big stagger step that he has in his drop back from under center. So they're really concentrating on that. And, of course, guys, I mean, what a unique offseason, right? The COVID-19 pandemic has prevented coaches from getting the hands-on instruction with players, but they've been doing all this via video. Baker's been taking the instruction, virtually, recording himself going through the footwork, sending it back to Alex Van Pelt, who actually has ended up using an app that he was using to work on his own golf swing. And he's using that app to kind of circle and draw things as Baker Mayfield goes through his footwork, and they're doing it. That's how they've done it in the off season to get ready. So it'll be interesting to see how this footwork really looks and how polished it is once they get him on the grass.
It sounds like that's a pretty significant pair of adjustments that he's got to make. This was not the off season to have to undergo a reconstruction.
You're exactly right. I mean, that's why, I think that they've got some good coaches in here who have identified some problems, and Baker's bought in, and all those things are really positive. But again, unprecedented times, guys, where they can't get their hands on them. It's going to be different when they're trying to coach them up on this stuff in person.
It's also amazing how creative and innovative coaches have to be. And as you just mentioned, using apps for golf swings to correct footwork is just the latest example of what all 32 teams are dealing with. The other factor, in addition to the footwork, that I think you could point to, Nate, that didn't certainly help Baker's cause last year was pass protection. Sacked 40 times. That's certainly a combination of the QB as well as the O-line, but they've completely revamped the tackle position. They brought in Jack Conklin from Tennessee, and they drafted Jedrick Wills out of Alabama. How much do you think that can revamp and change the outlook of the overall offensive line this season?
Well, it needed to happen, and it did, and it can revamp the overall outlook of the offensive line. But again, there is a big curveball here. Jack Conklin, he's established, they expect him to be good right away. He played in his own scheme for the Titans, and he's a great fit for what they're going to do, very similar schematically. So he's going to come in and be that right tackle, but then at left tackle, Jedrick Wills, that's where the curveball comes in. He played right tackle in high school and in college at the University of Alabama. They're confident in his athleticism and his willingness to move over to left tackle and his desire to get it figured out. And the former Browns 10-time Pro Bowl left tackle Joe Thomas is extremely excited and happy about the pick of Wills and helping him behind the scenes and thinks he can make this transition. Bill Callahan, the new Browns offensive line coach, one of the most respected offensive line minds in the sport, also is enthusiastic and optimistic about Wills and this transition. But again, here we go. This is a weird time where they can't coach the guy like they normally would, and they're going to get him in there with very, very few reps compared to what they would have under normal circumstances, and see if he can do it. So, the tackle on paper, both tackle spots should be a lot better than Greg Robinson last year at left tackle and Chris Hubbard at right tackle. By the way, they did restructure Chris Hubbard and kept him. So he's now a backup swing tackle instead of their starting right tackle. So he gives them some nice depth there. If he's your third tackle, you're doing okay. But Wills, there's a big question mark there just because he hasn't done it before. And, the coaches haven't been able to get with him yet.
Well, we went from quarterback to offensive line. Let's continue with the passing game. You've got the always colorful Odell Beckham Jr. on this team, and now David Njoku apparently has talked about wanting a trade. Could you kind of delve into the dynamic of what this poor first-year head coach is going to have to deal with already having some ruffling waters from the star tight end?
Well, it's definitely one of the things that Freddie Kitchens was not able to handle, and that's the big personalities, a lot of talent, a lot of guys wanting the ball, and you saw it blow up in his face. I mean, in Arizona, they're losing to the Cardinals, and Jarvis Landry's yelling at Freddie Kitchens on the sideline. You know, Odell Beckham Jr. and Jarvis Landry throughout the season made it clear they want to be more involved because, you know, after losses, they look back at it and say, if you get us the ball, we have a better chance to win because we are dynamic playmakers and we can score touchdowns and change the outcome. So, yeah, I mean, it continues. I mean, the Browns are stacked at the playmaking positions because John Dorsey came in here, inherited a team that had gone 1-31, and he comes in as GM and just loads up the talent. And they have a backfield of Nick Chubb and Kareem Hunt. They have Jarvis Landry and Odell Beckham Jr. They had tight ends like David Njoku, a former first-round pick, and then they signed Austin Hooper this offseason, two-time Pro Bowler from the Falcons, to join the tight end room, to lead the tight end room, and then they drafted a guy, Harrison Bryant, in the 4th round. So you got all these guys and only so many targets, only so many carries to go around, and Kevin Stefanski's already had these powwows with his coaching staff about how are we going to distribute the ball, who do we want to feature in certain matchups. It's going to change week to week. But we have to keep in mind that we want to get our guys fed and we want everybody to have an important role. But obviously team success has to be the priority, and individual success is going to take a back seat. And that can be hard for guys sometimes, especially after a loss. That's when you start to hear the complaints. So that is something that he's going to have to manage. That is challenging. And as for David Njoku, you know, it's interesting and really surprising, guys, that it's gone this way because he got in the doghouse of Freddie Kitchens last year. He had a broken wrist, at the beginning of the season and had to have surgery and was out for 10 games. And then they kind of clashed and they disagreed along the way of his comeback. And there was, a dispute between him and Freddie basically about when he was ready to return for action. Njoku kept saying, I'm ready. They didn't play him right away when he said thought he was ready. So, Njoku ends up getting in the doghouse. But then there's a regime change. Kitchens is fired. John Dorsey agrees with owners to part ways after he, did not accept the diminished role that they offered him. And in comes Andrew Berry as GM, Kevin Stefanski's head coach. They praise David Njoku. They exercise his fifth-year option. And, yes, they added Hooper. And, yes, they did draft Harrison Bryant in the 4th round, like I mentioned. But Stefanski uses 12 personnel a ton. I mean, 57% of the time as Minnesota Vikings offensive coordinator, he used multiple tight ends. So Njoku is a big part of the plans, yet he wants out. So it's really interesting that it's gone this way because he really did get a mulligan and new life with this new regime.
It's interesting to listen, Nate, to you describe the dynamics on offense between the coaches and the players, because I think the other thing that can't be overlooked is the fact that Freddie Kitchens was the head coach and also the play caller. Kevin Stefanski now, who also has been a play caller, is a first-time NFL head coach. How do you see that playing out this season? Because we always have the debate. If you're a head coach, should you also call plays? Should you just focus on overseeing the entire team? How do you think Kevin's going to go about that, especially with all of these well-known personalities on the team?
I think Kevin wants to let Alex Van Pelt call the plays, which did surprise me first, I'll admit, because I'm just used to seeing these offensive coordinators get hired by the Browns, and they come in and they call their own plays. They say, that's why you hired me, and I'm going to do it. Hugh Jackson, he did it for the first couple of years. Pat Shurmur, Freddie Kitchens, there's been a bunch of guys. So, Kevin Stefanski comes in, and actually January 14th they introduce him, and he says, you know what, we'll see. We'll do whatever was best for the Browns. And you think, oh, that sounds great. But then he stays consistent with that. He hires Alex Van Pelt, and he says, I want Alex Van Pelt to call plays in practices, in preseason games. We'll see how it goes. And if it goes well, then, yeah, he can be the play caller. Head coach has a lot on his plate. So I think that is the way he's been leaning the whole time. And I hate to keep saying how crazy these times are, but they just are, guys. And I wonder if the pandemic and a reduced preseason and wiping out of OTAs, and who knows how training camp exactly will look, I wonder if that will affect the decision that Kevin Stefanski has. But I think his original intent was to really try to let Alex Van Pelt call the plays and be more of that CEO head coach. I think that's what the Browns really liked about him. I think more than just what he did as Vikings offensive coordinator, they were just focused on the leadership, the character that they thought he would bring. Because, guys, they were a mess last year. No organization, no discipline, no plan, no identity, no structure. And I think the number one thing they were looking for is a guy who could come in and address those huge big picture questions more so than a guy who can just come in and call a successful offense.
You know, it's curious to me. You talk about a team that needs to find an identity. They'd like to spread the ball around, but they've got guys who all want the ball. Yet we know that Nick Chubb, after last year, when he touched it over 300 times from scrimmage, is a very effective back in more than one way, by the way. So are they better off trying to feed him and make him the focal point of the offense at the risk of maybe ticking off some of these other skill position guys who are going to scream for the pigskin themselves?
My opinion is yes. I think Nick Chubb is such a good player, and this scheme really is predicated on, running behind that wide zone blocking, and I think Nick Chubb is such a good fit for it. And I think that you just help Baker Mayfield so much by doing it. You set up the play action, and guys, what I didn't touch on earlier, and I probably should have, I kind of focused on footwork with Mayfield, but play action is a big deal statistically. Even though Mayfield struggled last year, and I don't have all the numbers in front of me, but his play action passing was just dramatically better than any other kind of drop back. So there's a lot of reasons to believe why this scheme will be good for him. Number one is the heavy use of play action. He's done really well when summoned to use that type of attack. So I think that it should be based on Nick Chubb. And Kareem Hunt is a really good running back too, and really is probably going to end up being their number 3 receiver. I mean, he was suspended for half of last season. He came in, and when it was all said and done, he finished 3rd on the team in catches despite missing 8 games. So he was behind Landry and Beckham. So I think that they have really good running backs, and they should be the focal point first and foremost. And then you have to be able to spread around. You have to be able to manage it all, and it's a huge challenge for Kevin Stefanski. But I would say that, the running game and Nick Chubb should be the bread and butter to begin with.
We're talking with Nate Ulrich, who covers the Browns for the Akron Beacon Journal. Nate, I want to switch gears to the defensive side of the ball. 22nd overall last season, allowed the 3rd most rushing yards in the league. So clearly they had their own issues, but you could also argue the offense didn't necessarily help their cause. Myles Garrett, Olivier Vernon, on paper, that's a nice 1-2 punch. Problem is, Garrett gets suspended late in the season. Vernon struggled to stay healthy. He wound up missing 6 games. Is it as simple to say you bring both of those guys back healthy and Garrett not in trouble via the suspension, and all of a sudden the rest of the defense feeds off of that? Or is that simplifying it too much?
Well, I think that's exactly what the Browns are hoping. It's funny because you could say this about a lot of the position groups on the team, but definitely defensive line. It was a microcosm for the team. Really talented, but underachieved, and was a disappointment. Freddie Kitchens, for all the things that he said last year that were kind of weird, I think that he really said some things that made sense about the defensive line when he said that he expects it to be the strength of the team. You have Odell Beckham Jr. and Jarvis Landry. A lot of people look at them and think, wow, what a receiving tandem. You have the running backs, you have Nick Chubb and Kareem Hunt I just talked about. But that defensive line had 2 defensive ends coming off Pro Bowl seasons. Sheldon Richardson, who's been a really good player and has Pro Bowl resume, and Larry Ogunjobi, who was coming off his first full season as a starting nose tackle and played well in 2018. So there was just so much promise there. And, Vernon was plagued by injury. Like you said, he played 10 games, but he was only healthy for like 8 of them. He played hurt in a couple of games and really could barely move, but tried to gut it out. He had a sprained knee. I think it was week 8 against the Broncos, and it just derailed his season. And, obviously Myles Garrett had 10 sacks in 10 games. He swings the helmet, connects with Mason Rudolph. He's suspended for the rest of the season. And the Browns ended up having to play some, defensive linemen who they basically got off the street. And, the defense was a shell of itself down the stretch. They lost 4 of the final 6 games. The rest is history. But, yeah, I mean, they obviously think that Myles Garrett is going to bounce back well and continue to be a really special player. They started talking contract extension with him this spring. They expressed interest in Jadeveon Clowney, but he remains a free agent and didn't really go anywhere. And they just restructured Vernon's contract to bring him back and pair him with Myles Garrett again. So this is another group that's really kind of, they're really talented. They didn't do well last year, but there were extenuating circumstances with the suspension of Garrett and the injury of Vernon, and they're thinking that if they can get these guys on the field, they're going to be pretty good. Plus, they really did upgrade the depth. Andrew Berry signed Adrian Claiborne as a rotational defensive end, and he's been pretty good in that role. And then he beefed up the interior behind Richardson and Ogunjobi. He ended up signing Andrew Billings from the Bengals. He's been a starter the past 2 years, and then he drafted Jacob Phillips in the 3rd round out of LSU. So he added 2 defensive tackles there. So I think the depth is better, and they've got all 4 starters back from a really talented group. And I think that if you're looking at the defense, that is by far the strength and the source of optimism.